Hi everybody, it's your boy Shazzu and welcome back to another video. If you're new to this channel and you're clicking on me for the very first time, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and also turn that post notification button so that you get notified every time I upload a new video. And also please share this video. It's a very important video, as you can tell by the tone of my voice, and it's very educational. So without further ado, let's get straight into today's content. But before we do that, I would like to put 4 disclaimers out there prior to answering this big question. Let's get into these disclaimers. The first disclaimer is not all Black people are homophobic. No race is a monolith or ethnicity is a monolith. So it's important that I clarify that. I obviously know plenty of Black people, other than those identifying with the LGBTQ plus community like myself, who are very supportive of our rights, who recognize same-sex marriage, all that. Most of my Black friends and Black family members who know that I'm bisexual are supportive. So wanted to put that out there. Disclaimer number 2. Yes, this video is family friendly. Not only is it safe for you to watch with children, but I highly encourage you to do so, especially with teenagers, etc. Because they do have impressionable minds. I feel like it's important that we start educating them on this topic early. But if you feel that there's any word, term, or phrase that I use in this video that's not safe for them, you could just tell them that this is not safe for you to research now, but maybe later on I could talk to you about it. Disclaimer number 3. There is no such thing as a gay agenda. No one or nothing can make you gay. Alright? If you watch something or listen to someone and it makes you feel like you're gay or want to tap into another, with the same sex or whatever, it means that you're already gay, you're already a lesbian, you already have something with you that makes you want to be that way. No one can make you do that. At the end of the day, all people within my community, within the LGBTQ plus community, want is recognition, respect, just the same as the world does for heteros. Okay? We're not trying to make anyone what they may not be. So it's just the recognition. Lastly, disclaimer number 4. Pedophiles, people who engage in bestiality, that's sex with animals, relationships with animals, or any type of objectophilia, people who marry trains or have weird fetishes or whatever, are not associated with the LGBTQIA community, okay? Do not associate those people with us. Those are completely different things. Alright, so with that being said, let's get straight into today's content. Now, before we answer the question, why are Black people homophobic, we need to define what homophobia is. So homophobia, also I got plenty of notes here because I want to make sure that I'm very clear and succinct with what I say. So homophobia is defined as the dislike, hatred, or prejudice, or culturally produced fear against homosexuals. This definition can work for biphobia, which is against bisexuals, or transphobia against transgender people or two-spirit people. Same as anti-gay. The word homophobia is the same as anti-gay. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily scared. There's some people who've responded saying that, oh, I don't like, being called homophobic because it's like you're saying I'm scared of you. I could beat you up if I wanted to or whatever it is. Trust me, we know there are plenty of hate crimes that go against LGBT plus individuals. So it doesn't mean you're necessarily scared. It could be dislike, hatred, or prejudice counts as being homophobic. Now, you might have heard me use the phrase culturally produced fear, and it's a very important term. Why I say homophobia is a culturally produced fear is because, like racism, homophobia is taught. You cannot be born with it, and it can't come naturally. You must be socially conditioned in order to have it or display it. So it's important for me to clarify that. You cannot be naturally homophobic or whatever. It's something that you have to be tuned into doing. But it's something you can also unlearn, just like racism. So let's get into the reasons. So reason number 1, which is probably the most prevalent reason, is Christianity/European colonialism as a reason for why a lot of Black people are homophobic. So the biggest defense that Black people are homophobic/anti-gay tend to have is their Christian faith. Churches teach us about the immorality of homosexuality, and this can be applied to the other two Abrahamic religions of Islam and Judaism, which have similar stances on same sex relations. And I feel like they have similar sort of verses that may be deemed as, homophobic, like in the Torah or Quran. I could be wrong. Now, colonial administrators introduced laws prohibiting unilateral acts. And from then on, it became commonplace for most African countries to actually criminalize same sex relationships. It's also important to note that American evangelical Christian groups like Pat Robertson's American Center for Law and Justice, ACLJ, Catholic group Human Life International, and Family Watch International all promote homophobia in Africa by encouraging the perception that same sex relations are un-African and imposed by the West. This is ironic since it was the Bible brought by Europeans that has a negative view of homosexuality rather than traditional African culture itself. Now, of course, Christianity did exist in Africa before white people came, so that was mainly in Northeast Africa and Ethiopia, Egypt, around there. This I'm referencing to Sub-Saharan Africa and most of Africa. So, former Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe, who, passed away a few years ago, even called homosexuality a white disease, while Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni called it a white import. In regards to black people in the diaspora, Jamaica was labeled by Time magazine in 2006 as the most homophobic place on earth. This is due to the country's colonial-era buggery law that criminalizes anal sex and shares a legal clause with bestiality, which means that in Jamaica, according to the law, homosexuals or homosexual like same-sex sex is considered the same as, or anal sex is considered the same as like having sex with the animal. They're considered animals. So acts of intimacy between two men are illegal, which highlights the double standard that the black community has no issue or is more open or is less bothered with lesbians than it is with gay men. Also, male slave masters in Jamaica and possibly other nations, not only within the Caribbean but probably in Africa, used to humiliate male slaves or male servants, workers, by raping them in public as a way of emasculating them. So there's issues of generational trauma that are passed on, and this taps into toxic masculinity, that if you're gay or transgender or all that, it's like, especially on black men, it's like you're not a man anymore. You're being feminized and we're losing ourselves. But I'll get into more of that later. So my counter argument to Christianity or religion in general and European colonialism being used as a way of defense for being homophobic is that there are 6 or 7 Bible verses used to defend homophobia. I can't speak on the Quran or Torah, so I'm not going to get into that, but theology and proper biblical context debunk them. In regards to the story of Sutton and Gomorrah, which is probably the most used reference against homosexuals, in Genesis chapter 19, verse 1 through 25, in case you want to read about it, the 2 angels sent to Sodom by God were persuaded by Lot to stay in his home. These angels had already been given the judgment that Sodom and Gomorrah were going to be destroyed. The Hebrew word for no, yada, on rare occasions implies sexual intercourse, because in one of the verses, the crowd says that they want to know who's inside the house, like know them. Hence, if this was the author's intended meaning, it would have been a clear case of attempted gang rape. The judgment on these cities was announced prior to the alleged homosexual incident, which was suspected because of 2 male angels in Lot's house. Also, Lot offered to release his daughters to the crowd to appease the crowd instead of the 2 male angels, suggests he knew his neighbors had heterosexual interests. Lot committed attempted incest, but God still spared him too. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse 48 to 50 says the people of Sodom failed to meet the needs of the poor and they worshipped idols. Leviticus chapter 18, verse 22 and chapter 20, verse 13, which says you shall not lie with a male as one lies with a female. It is an abomination. The Hebrew word for a male cult prostitute, kadesh, is mistranslated as a sodomite in some biblical versions. So the Hebrew word in Leviticus, also tovah, is usually associated with idolatry and the Canaanite religious practice of cult prostitution. This use of tovah shows that there's no conclusion that loving, responsible homosexual relationships are actually condemned. Rituals and rules found in the Old Testament were given to preserve the distinct characteristics and culture of Israel. So Galatians chapter 3 verse 22 to 25 states that Christians are no longer bound by these Jewish laws. Jesus also said nothing about homosexuality, but only preached about love, justice, mercy, and faith amongst other things. Homosexual practices cited in Romans chapter 1 verse 24 to 27 by Apostle Paul were believed to result from idolatry and such acts that are significantly different from loving, responsible lesbian/gay relationships. In Romans chapter 11 verse 24, God acts in an unnatural way, which is parathisin, to accept the Gentiles. So unnatural in these passages means action that contradicts one's own nature. So for example, a lesbian pretending to be straight would count within that definition. So being unnatural has nothing to do with you being like homosexual as you are or whatever. It is acting against who you are. And if you are homosexual, that's who you are. You don't have to act against that. That's your nature. So in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 9, Paul condemns those who are effeminate and abusers of themselves with mankind. In other versions of the Bible, it says something like, no homosexual offenders will inherit the kingdom of God. So new translations associate these words with homosexuals, which is false. Greek text malakos, which is translated to effeminate or soft, most likely refers to someone who lacks discipline or moral control. Arsenokotai, which sounds like coitus, which is, sexual intercourse, is derived from two Greek words, meaning males and beds. So in larger context, Paul was extremely concerned with prostitution, so he was likely referring to male prostitutes, not homosexuals in general. No translational version of the Bible is perfect. People write things in there for a specific agenda, just like the slave Bible made in England for use in America and the British West Indies. The slave Bible would talk about, for example, Joseph being enslaved or the enslavement of the Israelites, but would never talk about them being freed by God. So if you could have had slave Bibles which manipulated to keep slaves in slavery, what makes you think that homophobic people wouldn't put homophobic things in the Bible or sexist things in the Bible? Hello? Think for yourselves, people. The Bible is not God's word. Maybe some of the things are God's word, the things that God actually said that were written, but most of the things written in there are not from God. They're from imperfect people just like you and I. And if you're too ignorant or too close-minded to think that way, I think the Bible is some perfect book, and with all these translations is perfection, then you have issues. But that's just my opinion. I'd also like to, state that if Jesus was the basis of Christianity, never talked about homosexuality or addressed how wrong it is or whatever, yet Paul or some other people did, why would you take their words over Jesus, who is the basis of our faith, the only perfect person to exist? Anyways, so it's also important to emphasize that there's no such thing as a gay gene. And attraction in homosexuals works the same way as attraction in heterosexuals and bisexuals. It's mostly related to the hypothalamus in your brain, which produces hormones like dopamine and norepinephrine during attraction, and testosterone and estrogen, which are produced when feeling lust, so sexual gratification. Oxytocin is also known as the cuddle hormone, and along with vasopressin, they're in charge of attachment, which is what keeps you attached to someone, continuing to love them, being in a long-term relationship. So if gays/lesbians and bisexuals are sick or demon-possessed, then so is everyone else, because our biology is exactly the same. Oh, now, moving on, I would also like to expound upon this insane and nonsensical idea that homosexuality is un-African or un-Black and was brought over from the West. The LGBTQ plus community has existed in Africa and many other societies around the world for centuries, if not thousands of years. Hello, it's referenced in the Bible. There's references to that. So whether it was accepted or not is unclear. But it at least proves that this community, has been a part of Africa, the site of the origin of mankind since forever. So it can also be theorized that, homosexuality actually began in Africa and then spread throughout the rest of the world. Something to think about, but y'all not ready for that conversation. Now, in North Africa, 2 male Egyptian high officials named Nyank Klum and Klum Hotep, I'm sorry if I'm not pronounced that right, who served Pharaoh Nusere around 2494 to 2345 BC, had wives and children of their own, but they were buried together in one mastaba tomb. In their mastaba tomb, several paintings depict both men embracing and touching each other nose to nose, as you can see in the image, which in Egypt at the time represented a kiss. Such a burial means people were aware of their relationship and possibly approved of it based on the tribute. Some scholars think they were conjoined twins, but the depiction clearly shows 2 separate bodies. And even if they were conjoined twins, how could they have had their own separate lives, having their own wives and children? If they're conjoined, it means that they would be having the same wife or like children because they have the same DNA and they're connected together with the same genitalia. Unless it's one of those conjoined situations where it's only by the back. But clearly in the picture and based on the text, they were living separate lives. They're not conjoined. Their shoulders are demarcated. Also, during Mamluk rule in Egypt, Arabic poetry described the pleasures of pederastic relationships. So pederasty basically is relationships between little boys, so between adults, specifically adult men and little boys, which was something Paul was also concerned about as well. Or relationships with adolescents. So you could have an adult man with a teenager. These things happened, and they still possibly happen today. Boys from Europe were sent to become sex workers in Egypt and in Cairo. Cross-dressing men called kawals would entertain audiences with song and dance. So this was something that was very known in society and was accepted there in some parts of society in Egypt. Among the Otoroluba people of Sudan, a special transvestite role existed whereby men dressed and lived as women. Even marriages between trans men existed amongst the Moru, Yima, and Tira people. Now moving on to East Africa, further down, during the rule of the kingdoms of Dmit, Aksum, and the Ethiopian Empire, which was joined with Eritrea, homosexuality was actually outlawed. So you can't make something illegal and discriminate what isn't there. East African societies like the Meru and Kikuyu people of Kenya have reports of mugawes, which are male priests in traditional religions dressing as women. And this is all pre-colonial times, by the way, before white people came and also before Arabs. Sometimes, some Arabs had come, but they hadn't spread throughout all of Africa, sometimes without them. In Rwanda, there were Ikiwundus that were Swahili-speaking Mashoga people who would take on women's names and cook and clean for their husbands. Among the Malay people of southern Ethiopia, a small minority of men crossed over to feminine roles. Cross-dressing men have also been found amongst the Bunyoro people of Uganda. Take that, Yoweri Museveni. And some forms of same-sex relations were institutionalized. It's also theorized that King Mwanga II himself was also gay, and one scholar noted that it was an open secret. So in West Africa, eunuchs, which are castrated males who are employed to guard the women's living areas in oriental courts in the kingdom of Dahomey, which is present-day Benin, were known as royal wives. The Dagaba people of Burkina Faso believed that homosexual men were able to mediate between the spirit and human worlds, like Aang and Avatar, for example. They also believed that gender was based on energy and not anatomy. Interesting, right? And then moving on to Southern Africa, Ancient sandrock paintings near Guruve in Zimbabwe dating back 2,000 years show explicit scenes between copulating males. Also, during pre-colonial times in Zambia, our neighbor upstairs, more north, so during pre-colonial times in Zambia, records show youths and adult men had sexual contact during the circumcision rites of the Ndembu. Women-to-women marriage in which one woman pays a bride piece to acquire husband's rights to another woman has also been documented in more than 30 African populations. There's actually a seminal book on this. I'll probably put it up if I find the book. But, basically there's so many more examples and you find them throughout all regions of Africa. The LGBTQ plus community is very African. It's something that has been there since forever. So, it's important to note that. Now, just because something has been around for forever, isn't always necessarily mean that it's the right thing. It's kind of like with generational curses. You want to get rid of them, but this is not a curse, and this does not affect African societies at all. Even if there are a lot of gay men in the African society, which is rare because we're usually the minority, or bisexuals and minority, etc. It doesn't bring down the economy or the strength of that society. These societies would fall and would rise and would be powerful with our presence there either way. So it's the heterosexuals who are determining the course of history and what happens, not the LGBTQ plus community. Now, moving on to the second reason why Black people are homophobic or maybe homophobic, is STD, specifically with HIV/AIDS. Now, so another possible reason for homophobia in the Black community is the fact that STDs, especially the spread of HIV/AIDS, is blamed and mostly associated with gay men. HIV/AIDS had already existed in West Central Africa in the early to mid 20th century by the time the CDC in the US officially recognized AIDS in 1981. And it's theorized that this was due to the fact that it had already existed in other primates, in apes or chimpanzees, for example, and had then mutated to come onto human beings. So this is the same with many other viruses throughout history, like Ebola or the coronavirus, which mutates from an animal and spreads to humans. There are conspiracy theories that it was brought over by the West again, which is a common defense that Africans seem to have because we always like to blame things on white people. Not everything is from white people. They're things that naturally just come from here, okay? Oh my gosh. Now, gay men are at a higher risk of contracting HIV/AIDS because the virus is more transmittable during anal sex than vaginal intercourse. Straight couples can do both anal sex and vaginal intercourse, while same-sex cisgendered male couples cannot do that. It's also you can find STDs and AIDS spread amongst anyone from any kind of relationship. So in addition to sex, you can get AIDS from needle sharing, cuts, piercings, pretty much any blood exchange from any part of the body, So it's important to note that this, the HIV/AIDS pandemic is something that affects every single person. And then some people get it, through pregnancy. But fortunately nowadays there's treatment, there are medicines that can help you live a long life with it if you're test positive, or help you prevent getting it even if you're pregnant or you yourself are positive. The information is out there. So let's, get out with the ignorance that this is, that we're blaming this on the LGBTQ plus community. All right? We're just as affected as you. And then the last reason that I wanted to note for why Black people may be homophobic is toxic masculinity and personal incidences. For centuries, the Black community has faced marginalization, discrimination, and blatant hatred from other races/ethnicities. In response to this treatment, Black people have always been resilient, and their strength and perseverance are important attributes to overcoming these obstacles they have experienced. Being gay/bi or trans is often associated with femininity, and thus is taken as weakness, because people usually associate women with being weak. Sometimes it's the whole strong Black woman thing, but femininity is usually associated with weakness. So gays are seen by some Black people as a threat to the Black/African identity. Trust me, there's a certain person in my life, who used to have that idea, but I won't get into it. This ties back to homosexuality being seen as un-African. Since some black people believe homosexuality came from the West, it's no surprise that identifying as LGBTQ plus means that to them, black people, it means to them that you're not African, black or African. Another important thing to note is that some black women have male partners who cheat on them with other men or leave them for other men. So this obviously leads to a frustration and hurt that is then projected towards gay men in general. The same could be said of women that leave their men for other women or cheat, and other situations. Other possible causes of discrimination against LGBTQ plus community could be the fear of the reaction from society. If your family isn't, even if your family isn't homophobic. An Indian American friend of mine, if you're watching this, you know, told me his grandfather back in India would possibly lose his business and his respect in his city/area in India if my friend, who is in America, was gay and had a same-sex wedding. So I'm sure cases similar to that exist in black communities. I myself have had conversations with certain family members about our reputation and businesses, and also just how our rapport with other people would change if they knew I was bisexual and I'm likely to have a male partner, same-sex partner. Because I am out. I'm open about it, but obviously not everybody knows. And it's not that I'm trying to hide it. If you ask me, I'll tell you. In 2011, Robert Champion, a gay black student at HBCU Florida A&M University, was beaten to death during a hazing incident, and his lawyer believed his sexuality was a contributing factor to his abuse. I think he was also part of a fraternity, so it's also, you know, possible that maybe these fraternities probably sometimes don't want, I guess, an invasion or want a lot of gay or LGBT, you know, sort of members to join because they don't want to tarnish the image. Maybe these fraternities are sponsored by Christian groups, so they do things with churches. I don't know. But a lot of the times, homophobia stems from reputation. You may not actually be homophobic, but you think that you have to be because of the society you live in. So, and there could be many other personal incidences. So in conclusion, the LGBTQ plus community poses no threat to our global society today. Nor was it a chaotic, community yesterday. Even I, as a bisexual man, had difficulty understanding and accepting transgender / non-binary individuals. So within the LGBTQ plus community, it's not all rays and sunshine. Sometimes there's discrimination against each other. I've even been told stories of this from other friends about, you know, a lesbian friend of mine was judgmental towards trans people and stuff like that. But just because you may not understand homosexuals or are uncomfortable when you see cross-dressing or same-sex kissing, etc., remember that these people have literally done nothing to hurt you or disturb the peace. They're living their best lives, and you should stick to doing your own thing while they stick to theirs. I beg every single lawmaker, politician, judge, president, monarch, prime minister, and anyone of influence around the world, if you're watching this video, or share this video if you can, to legalize same-sex marriage and make LGBTQ plus individuals feel safe and welcome in your area. LGBTQ plus people like Alan Turing invented the computer and helped break the Nazi code that helped end World War II. The first American woman in space, Sally Ride, was gay. George Washington Carver, the most prominent black scientist of the early 20th century, who made immense contributions to agriculture, gave us peanut butter and other things, was bisexual, like me. Some of the greatest music of all time has come from LGBT plus individuals like Frank Ocean, who's bi, Lil Nas X, who's gay, Freddie Mercury, gay, Elton John, Lady Gaga, etc. And so with that being said, there's some key takeaways that I want you to remember before I close off. The Holy Trinity, basically God or Jesus or the Holy Spirit, are not homophobic. It's Christians and biblical authors who are the homophobic ones and the people that they have deceived for years upon years. That book, as well as the Torah and Quran and any other holy text, was written by regular, imperfect people just like you and I who possibly had agendas to influence the public. Takeaway number 2. The LGBTQ plus community has been a part of Africa and the rest of the world for thousands of years. If God really did want them in his kingdom, why are they still here today? Why would God purposely set up some of his people to fail or go to hell and all of this stuff? attraction is attraction. It's naturally there. I don't choose that I'm attracted to it. It's something that just naturally comes. And takeaway number 3, one of your family members, friends, workmates, etc. could be gay, slash lesbian, slash bi, etc. But your homophobia makes them afraid to be themselves. So, remember that I acknowledge that this is something we're all getting used to. Something that may be new for some people, even though it's been I know that this is something that we may be getting used to, something that's new for some people, even though it's been around for forever. But take the time to realize that, uncomfortability leads to movement. You know what I mean? And it's important to have these uncomfortable conversations. Let me know if you want me to, maybe do another similar video to this. Put your comments down below and please share this video. I love you guys all so much. Love you, Shazzy Gang, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys!